What's up, guys? Glad you're here. Let's look some strange and interesting facts.
Small towns don't need armies, politics, or oil money to start wars. Just one parking spot, a church sign, or a suspiciously loud lawnmower. And somehow that tiny argument snowballs into lawsuits, revenge parades, diner bans, and neighbors treating each other like Cold War enemies over a mailbox shaped slightly too patriotic. We've only scratched the surface. Fact 1. In a tiny town in Minnesota, a feud began over something so unbelievably petty it sounds made up. A diner changed its Friday special from mashed potatoes to waffle fries. That's it. No scandal. No crime. Just potatoes losing their smooth, creamy identity. But one retired farmer took this personally, like the diner had insulted his entire bloodline. He stormed out claiming waffle fries were city people food, then convinced half the town to boycott the place. Soon, church groups picked sides. Families stopped sitting together at football games. Somebody spray-painted Trader Taters on the diner wall like this was the vegetable version of the Cold War. The owner responded by offering free waffle fries for veterans, which somehow made people even angrier. For nearly 3 years, locals drove 30 miles to eat elsewhere rather than surrender to what they called deep-fried tyranny. Somewhere in America, diplomacy collapsed over potatoes shaped like a fishing net. Fact 2. A quiet neighborhood in Oklahoma went to war because of a plastic flamingo. Not 100 flamingos. 1. A 72-year-old widow placed it beside her mailbox because she thought it looked cheerful. Her neighbor, a former high school principal with the personality of expired mayonnaise, immediately declared the bird an attack on property values. What followed was less a disagreement and more a suburban hostage crisis. The principal measured the flamingo daily with a ruler to make sure it wasn't violating height restrictions nobody had heard of before. In response, other neighbors started secretly placing more flamingos around town at night, like some kind of guerrilla lawn ornament resistance movement. Within weeks, there were pink birds everywhere. Roofs, porches, pickup trucks. Someone even dressed one as Elvis during the 4th of July parade. The town council eventually had to hold an emergency meeting entirely dedicated to flamingo legislation. Imagine explaining to your ancestors that democracy survived world wars only to collapse over a decorative bird from a Florida gift shop. Fact 3. In rural Pennsylvania, 2 neighbors stopped speaking for 11 years because one man waved too aggressively. That was literally the beginning. Every morning at exactly 7:30, Harold waved at passing cars from his porch like an over-caffeinated game show host. One day, his neighbor Frank accused him of waving with attitude. Nobody knows what that means. Apparently, Harold's arm motion carried what Frank described as a smug energy. Instead of ignoring it like normal adults, Frank built a 6-foot fence directly facing Harold's porch. Harold retaliated by installing brighter porch lights. Frank answered with louder wind chimes. Harold bought a rooster. Frank purchased outdoor speakers that played polka music at dawn. Soon their feud became local entertainment. People brought lawn chairs to watch arguments like it was NASCAR for retirees. Even the mailman requested a different route because both men kept trying to recruit him as a witness. By the end, nobody remembered what started the conflict anymore. They just knew 2 elderly men had transformed passive aggression into an Olympic sport. Fact 4. A small town in Georgia nearly split in half because somebody painted the water tower beige instead of blue. For 40 years, the tower had been bright blue, standing proudly above the town like a giant steel blueberry. Then a newly elected mayor decided the town needed a more modern aesthetic, which is politician language for "I discovered Pinterest." Overnight, workers repainted the entire tower beige. Beige, the color of waiting rooms and unsalted crackers. Residents reacted like someone had burned down the Statue of Liberty. Protesters marched carrying signs that read, "Make the tower blue again." Local businesses refused to serve the mayor coffee. One barber offered free haircuts to anybody wearing blue clothing. The high school marching band performed funeral music during the next council meeting, just to be dramatic. But the real insanity came when rival churches began debating whether beige was spiritually depressing. The whole town basically entered a paint-based psychological breakdown. Eventually, the mayor lost re-election by 73 votes to a man whose entire campaign slogan was simply, "Blue was fine." Fact 5. In a tiny town in Iowa, a full-scale neighborhood feud exploded because one man refused to take down his Christmas lights. Not in January, not in February. We're talking about August. His reasoning was simple and deeply unsettling. He claimed the lights made his house feel emotionally available. At first, neighbors laughed it off. Then he upgraded the display. Suddenly, inflatable snowmen were baking under 90-degree heat, while Jingle Bell Rock blasted across the street during barbecue season. Parents taking kids to Little League games had to explain why Santa appeared to be suffering from heat stroke beside a melted plastic reindeer. The Homeowners Association tried sending warnings, but the man responded by adding even more decorations every time he received a letter. Eventually, rival neighbors began retaliating with giant Halloween displays in spring just to confuse him. Before long, the entire street looked like a seasonal identity crisis, sponsored by discount lawn decor and unresolved emotional trauma. Fact 6. A small fishing town in Maine nearly descended into chaos because two brothers argued over who made the better clam chowder. That sounds harmless, until you realize both men owned competing seafood restaurants directly across the street from each other. One used cream. The other insisted real chowder should be broth-based. What started as passive-aggressive menu signs quickly escalated into a culinary Cold War. Locals began choosing sides with terrifying loyalty. Churches organized separate chowder fundraisers. High school students got banned from wearing restaurant t-shirts because cafeteria arguments kept turning into screaming matches about potatoes. Somebody anonymously dumped 20 pounds of shellfish onto the rival restaurant's porch at midnight like a seafood mafia warning. Tourists arriving for the annual Harbor Festival accidentally walked into what felt like a creamy, soup-based civil war. The mayor eventually attempted peace talks by hosting a blind taste test, which only made things worse after accusations that the judges had cream bias. America truly reaches its final form when adults weaponize soup. Fact 7. In a quiet town in Arizona, two neighbors spent nearly 6 years fighting over wind chimes. Not loud industrial chimes either. Tiny decorative ones shaped like hummingbirds. One retired man claimed the sound was relaxing and good for the soul. His neighbor described it as a ghost tapping silverware together inside his skull. Every night became psychological warfare. The chime owner bought larger chimes after complaints started, insisting he was exercising his constitutional right to peaceful decoration. The other man retaliated by recording the noise and playing it back through speakers at city council meetings like audio evidence from a murder trial. Soon, residents divided into pro-chime and anti-chime factions. Yard signs appeared around town reading, "Let freedom chime," while others demanded, "Silence is patriotic." Local Facebook groups completely collapsed into chaos. One woman compared the argument to the Cuban Missile Crisis, but with more retirees and fewer nuclear weapons. Somehow, a peaceful desert town transformed into the nation's least important battlefield. Fact 8. In a rural town in Tennessee, a feud erupted after somebody painted a giant chicken on the side of their barn. That's it. Just a chicken. But unfortunately, the chicken faced directly toward the mayor's house and looked strangely judgmental. The mayor became convinced it was mocking him personally. He claimed the bird's expression carried hostile intent, which is an incredible sentence for any adult human being to say out loud. Things spiraled immediately. The mayor fined the farmer for aggressive agricultural imagery, which sounds less like a legal violation and more like a rejected indie band name. In response, locals started placing chicken decorations everywhere around town. Ceramic chickens, wooden chickens. One man dressed as a chicken during a council meeting and refused to explain himself. Soon, tourists arrived specifically to see the angry mayor chicken, turning the whole mess into an accidental roadside attraction. By the end, the town gift shop was selling t-shirts featuring the bird's face above the slogan, "Cluck around and find out." Fact 9. In a tiny town in Missouri, a feud started because somebody kept feeding raccoons like they were honored dinner guests. Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, an elderly man named Leonard placed hot dogs on his porch and waited for what he called the boys to arrive. Soon, nearly 20 raccoons were waddling through the neighborhood every night like a tiny furry biker gang. At first, people thought it was adorable. Then the raccoons started stealing dog food, climbing through cat doors, and somehow learning how to open garbage cans with the coordination of experienced burglars. One neighbor claimed a raccoon stared directly into his kitchen window while eating a Pop-Tart with human confidence. The town split instantly. Some residents defended Leonard as a gentle animal lover, while others described him as the raccoon warlock. Matters escalated after somebody anonymously mailed him a cease and desist letter featuring cartoon trash cans. Nothing unites small-town America quite like a shared fear of highly organized wildlife. Fact 10. In a sleepy town in Kentucky, two local churches accidentally launched a years-long feud over pancake breakfast. One church advertised theirs as the fluffiest pancakes in the county, which should have remained a harmless breakfast slogan. Unfortunately, the rival church across town took this as a direct spiritual challenge. Within weeks, both congregations were competing like breakfast-themed gladiators. One side upgraded to blueberry syrup fountains, while the other introduced live banjo music and unlimited sausage links. Locals started treating Sunday breakfasts like sporting events, comparing pancake thickness with the intensity of football analysts reviewing game footage. Somebody created anonymous flyers accusing one church of using store-bought batter against the Lord's wishes. Another rumor claimed rival volunteers were sabotaging syrup temperatures before fundraisers. By year 3, families literally attended different churches based entirely on pancake loyalty. The mayor attempted to calm tensions with a unity brunch, but both congregations accused him of favoring the opposing syrup strategy. Humanity truly peaked when religion and breakfast merged into competitive chaos. Fact 11. In a quiet town in Nevada, a neighborhood war broke out over a rooster named Kevin. Kevin belonged to a retired mechanic who described the bird as a patriotic morning alarm clock. Unfortunately, Kevin believed sunrise happened whenever he personally felt inspired, including 2:30 in the morning and occasionally midnight. Sleep-deprived neighbors begged the owner to do something, but he defended Kevin with the loyalty of a man protecting a national treasure. Things escalated after one furious resident began retaliating by blasting opera music at dawn to confuse the rooster psychologically. Instead of stopping, Kevin somehow got louder, like the bird viewed Puccini as a challenge. Soon town meetings sounded completely insane. Adults argued passionately about chicken rights, while one woman tearfully described Kevin as an emotionally abusive alarm system. Somebody even printed bumper stickers reading, "Let Kevin crow." The feud became so legendary that tourists started driving through town hoping to hear the infamous rooster themselves. Imagine explaining to future generations that your town's biggest crisis involved a bird named Kevin screaming at darkness. Fact 12. A tiny town in Oregon nearly tore itself apart because somebody installed a 14-foot-tall lawn lighthouse nowhere near water. The owner claimed it added coastal charm, despite the nearest ocean being several hours away. During the day, it looked ridiculous enough already, but at night, the rotating beacon swept across neighboring homes like a prison escape searchlight. Residents complained they felt interrogated while eating dinner. One man claimed the beam flashed directly through his bathroom window every 20 seconds, like maritime psychological warfare. The lighthouse owner refused to turn it off because he believed the town lacked nautical vision. Naturally, neighbors retaliated in the most suburban way possible. One family installed fake palm trees. Another built a decorative pirate ship mailbox. Soon, entire streets transformed into a confused seaside hallucination, despite being surrounded by forests and tractors. Local officials eventually tried regulating decorative lighthouses, which is probably not what anyone imagined government service would involve. Nothing says American small-town pride like pretending you live beside the Atlantic Ocean while standing next to cornfields. Fact 13. In a rural town in Alabama, an all-out feud exploded after somebody painted their garage purple. Not soft lavender. We're talking casino carpet purple. The kind of color that looks like a grape soda exploded during a lightning storm. Neighbors reacted as if the homeowner had launched a missile from the driveway. One resident described the garage as an assault on traditional eyesight. Another claimed it lowered property values by emotionally exhausting passing drivers. The homeowner naturally doubled down immediately. He added purple shutters, purple flower pots, and eventually a purple mailbox shaped like a dragon. Furious neighbors responded by painting their own garages aggressively beige in protest, creating what looked like a war between joy and retirement. Soon, local Facebook groups became digital battlefields full of blurry photos and passive-aggressive comments about community standards. Somebody even organized a neutral colors cookout to defend normal paint shades. By the end, tourists were literally stopping to take photos of the infamous purple garage, like it was a historical landmark dedicated to stubbornness. Fact 14. In a tiny town in Arkansas, a feud erupted because one neighbor kept mowing his lawn in perfect baseball stadium patterns. Every Saturday morning, he transformed his yard into a striped masterpiece so precise, it looked ready to host the World Series. At first, the neighborhood admired it. Then people started feeling personally attacked by the quality of his grass. Suddenly, everyone's lawn looked like abandoned hayfields beside his emerald masterpiece. One retired dentist became so obsessed with competing that he bought industrial-grade fertilizer and began measuring grass height with a ruler. Soon, entire weekends turned into passive-aggressive landscaping warfare. Men stood silently in driveways staring at each other's lawns like Cold War generals analyzing missile silos. Somebody accused another neighbor of mowing diagonally for attention. One family painted their mower racing stripes just to intimidate rivals. The town hardware store literally ran out of fertilizer during peak summer combat. America invented space travel, yet suburban men still emotionally collapse over grass patterns. Fact 15. In a small town in Indiana, neighbors launched a years-long feud because somebody installed an overly enthusiastic motion sensor Halloween decoration. Every single time someone walked past the house, a 6-foot animatronic witch screamed loud enough to awaken historical trauma. The problem was the owner left it activated year-round. Imagine casually checking your mail in April and suddenly hearing demonic cackling beside plastic pumpkins, melting in spring sunlight. Elderly residents nearly launched themselves into orbit from jump scares. Delivery drivers started tossing packages from the sidewalk like they were avoiding a landmine. The homeowner insisted the witch created excitement for the community, which is technically true if your definition of excitement includes cardiac distress. Soon, neighbors retaliated with equally ridiculous decorations. One man installed a singing cowboy Santa that activated whenever the witch screamed. Another added motion-sensitive rooster noises just to contribute chaos. By summer, the entire street sounded like a haunted tractor dealership having an emotional breakdown. Fact 16. In rural Kansas, a feud exploded after somebody started flying an enormous decorative flag featuring a giant bass fish wearing sunglasses. Not an American flag, not a sports team logo, just a smug-looking fish the size of a garage door. The owner claimed it represented freedom and lake culture, despite living nowhere near a lake. Neighbors immediately became weirdly offended by the fish's confidence. One resident argued the sunglasses made the bass appear disrespectfully sarcastic. Soon people divided into camps supporting or opposing what locals began calling the cool fish agenda. Rival neighbors retaliated by flying increasingly bizarre flags themselves. Suddenly, the street looked like a failed carnival. One house displayed a wolf howling at lightning. Another raised a giant pickle flag without explanation. The base owner escalated by illuminating his fish with floodlights at night, turning it into a glowing aquatic dictator looming over the neighborhood. Somehow, a quiet farming town accidentally reinvented medieval kingdom warfare through decorative polyester. Fact 17. A tiny town in Ohio nearly collapsed into chaos because two women argued over who baked the official town pie for the annual Harvest Festival. One had held the title for nearly 20 years and treated pie making like a sacred blood oath. Then a younger woman arrived with a caramel apple recipe that people described as life-altering. What followed was less a baking competition and more a flour-covered political coup. Families split into rival dessert factions. Church potlucks became dangerous territory where people whispered pie opinions like classified information. One bakery window got vandalized with the phrase "crust traitor" written in whipped cream. The older baker accused her rival of using unnatural cinnamon quantities, which sounds like something a medieval village would prosecute. Meanwhile, tourists unknowingly wandered into the festival expecting wholesome Americana, and instead found middle-aged adults debating pie texture with the intensity of courtroom attorneys. Somewhere, George Washington is looking down, wondering how democracy became emotionally dependent on baked fruit. Fact 18. In a sleepy town in Montana, a feud started because one man installed an alarm system that played banjo music instead of a normal siren. Every time somebody walked too close to his garage, the neighborhood exploded into aggressive bluegrass. At first, residents found it mildly amusing. Then raccoons triggered the alarm every single night. Soon people were waking up at 3 in the morning hearing frantic banjo solos echo across the valley like a hillbilly apocalypse warning. Neighbors begged him to change it, but he insisted the music felt friendlier than police sirens. Matters escalated after another resident retaliated by installing cowbell-based security alarms. Before long, the entire neighborhood sounded like a confused country music festival under siege. One exhausted woman described the street as living inside a washing machine full of farm instruments. The sheriff eventually visited after multiple noise complaints, and reportedly left 20 minutes later with a headache and a newfound hatred of string instruments. Fact 19. In a tiny Louisiana town, neighbors became sworn enemies because somebody kept releasing balloons during birthday parties. Sounds harmless until you realize one retired man believed balloons were sky litter and treated every helium release like an environmental war crime. He began documenting balloon launches with binoculars from his porch like an overly dramatic wildlife investigator. Eventually, he started chasing children's birthday parties in a golf cart, demanding aerial accountability. Parents responded by buying even bigger balloon displays purely out of spite. One birthday featured nearly 200 balloons shaped like cartoon dinosaurs floating above town, like a low-budget parade from another dimension. The anti-balloon neighbor retaliated by creating homemade posters showing sad turtles beside the words, "Your party hates nature." Soon the town council was forced to hold emergency discussions about balloon regulations, while exhausted adults argued passionately about helium ethics. Imagine being a government official whose entire Tuesday evening gets consumed by airborne birthday decorations and emotionally unstable retirees. Fact 20. In a quiet town in North Carolina, a feud erupted after one neighbor began practicing the bagpipes every evening at sunset. Not professionally either. We're talking full-volume beginner bagpipes, the kind of sound that makes nearby dogs question existence itself. The man insisted he was honoring his Scottish ancestry despite being mostly German according to everyone who knew him. At first, neighbors tolerated it because small towns survive on pretending things are normal. Then the nightly performances became longer, louder, and somehow worse. One exhausted resident described the music as a goose being slowly haunted. Another claimed the bagpipes caused his tomatoes to stop growing out of stress. Soon, retaliation began. One neighbor blasted mariachi music during practice sessions. Another purchased industrial leaf blowers specifically timed to interrupt songs halfway through. The bagpipe player responded by adding a full kilt outfit and marching dramatically through the street during performances. Nothing captures the spirit of small-town America quite like weaponized cultural enthusiasm after dinner. Fact 21. In a tiny Nebraska town, a feud exploded because one neighbor installed a fake cannon in his front yard. It didn't fire anything. It wasn't historical. It was literally decorative. But unfortunately, the owner treated it like a national monument, polishing it every weekend while dramatically referring to his lawn as the fort. Neighbors initially ignored it until he began aiming the cannon in different directions, depending on who annoyed him that week. Suddenly, people woke up to find a giant fake artillery piece pointed directly at their kitchen window, like suburban psychological warfare. One woman claimed she felt emotionally invaded by imaginary warfare. Another neighbor retaliated by placing plastic army men all over his lawn, staging fake attacks toward the cannon. Soon, rival households added military decorations until the entire street looked like a retirement community preparing for battle against pirates. The town council eventually had to debate whether decorative weaponry counted as intimidation. Humanity truly thrives when adults transform lawn ornaments into international diplomacy crises. Fact 22. In a small town in Mississippi, neighbors became mortal enemies because somebody started roasting coffee beans in their garage every morning at 5 o'clock. The smell drifted across the entire neighborhood like a caffeinated fog. Some residents loved it and described waking up to a free Starbucks sunrise. Others absolutely hated it because it made them crave coffee before work. One exhausted woman claimed the smell emotionally manipulated her into buying expensive lattes. The coffee roasting neighbor leaned into the chaos immediately. He began experimenting with stronger blends and proudly announced espresso season, like it was deer hunting. Soon, rival neighbors retaliated by cooking overpowering breakfasts at dawn. Bacon, onions, burnt toast. One man grilled sardines before sunrise purely out of spite. The neighborhood transformed into an accidental 24-hour food court powered entirely by passive aggression. By the end, local realtors literally advertised homes as being located outside the coffee zone, which sounds less like suburban marketing and more like surviving a natural disaster. Fact 23. In a rural Idaho town, a feud spiraled completely out of control because one homeowner built an absurdly large birdhouse. Not a cute little birdhouse either. This thing looked like a tiny Victorian mansion for sparrows. It had shutters. A miniature porch swing. Somebody even claimed it had electricity, though nobody confirmed that because, frankly, everyone was too frightened by the commitment level already. Neighbors became furious because tourists kept stopping to photograph the bird palace, creating traffic jams beside a road normally used by tractors and emotionally exhausted cows. The homeowner escalated further by installing security cameras specifically to protect the birdhouse from vandals. Rival neighbors retaliated by building increasingly ridiculous lawn projects themselves. One man constructed a tiny wooden saloon for squirrels. Another built a church for ducks near his pond. Before long, the neighborhood looked like a suburban amusement park, designed entirely by retirees with unlimited hardware store coupons and unresolved competitive instincts. Fact 24. In a quiet town in South Dakota, a feud erupted after somebody installed an outdoor clock tower that chimed every hour like a tiny suburban Big Ben. During the day, it seemed charming enough. Then midnight happened, and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. The owner insisted the clock gave the neighborhood character, which is true if your desired character is Victorian ghost town suffering from insomnia. Sleep-deprived residents begged him to silence it overnight, but he refused because time never sleeps. That sentence alone should have legally qualified him for therapy. Soon retaliation began. One neighbor purchased motion-sensitive floodlights aimed directly at the clock tower. Another started practicing trombone on his porch during evening chimes. Somebody anonymously attached a note to the tower reading, "We know what time it is. Please stop." Matters reached peak absurdity when local children began using the chimes to prank neighbors with fake emergency countdowns. Somehow, an entire town became emotionally hostage to a decorative timepiece with the confidence of a medieval king. Fact 25. In a tiny New Mexico town, two neighbors launched a years-long war because one man insisted on displaying giant inflatable holiday decorations for literally every occasion imaginable. Christmas made sense. Then came Valentine's Day, flamingos, Easter dragons, giant inflatable Uncle Sam, riding a motorcycle for Memorial Day. By autumn, his lawn looked like a parade sponsored by sleep deprivation and discount batteries. The problem wasn't just the decorations themselves, it was the generators powering them all night long with the soothing sound of a lawnmower, trapped in existential despair. Neighbors complained the inflatables blocked sunsets and frightened local wildlife. One woman claimed her dog developed seasonal confusion after seeing a 12-foot inflatable turkey wearing sunglasses in August. Rival residents retaliated by decorating their own lawns with aggressively minimalist themes. One neighbor displayed a single plain rock labeled, "This is enough." Tourists began driving through town specifically to see the infamous inflatable street, proving once again Americans will absolutely monetize psychological collapse. Fact 26. In rural Virginia, a feud exploded because one neighbor started ringing an old railroad bell every evening to announce dinner. He claimed it honored his grandfather, who worked on trains. Unfortunately, the bell sounded less like wholesome nostalgia and more like a prison escape warning from 1883. Entire neighborhoods jolted upright whenever it rang. Dogs barked, babies cried. One elderly resident reportedly dove under his kitchen table during the first week because he thought civilization had ended. The bell owner refused to stop because he insisted families used to appreciate tradition. Neighbors responded by weaponizing traditions of their own. One family installed a giant dinner gong. Another blew a hunting horn at sunset. Somebody bought actual church bells online. Within months, the entire town sounded like medieval Europe panicking during a dragon attack. The sheriff eventually described the neighborhood as acoustically haunted. Nothing captures small-town American stubbornness quite like escalating noise complaints into a full historical reenactment. Fact 27. In a tiny Florida town, neighbors nearly tore the community apart because somebody painted fake parking lines in front of his own house. The man became tired of people parking too close to his mailbox, so he grabbed white paint and created what looked like official city parking spaces, complete with arrows and fake numbers. Shockingly, it worked. Tourists and delivery drivers obeyed the fake markings immediately, because humans will apparently follow any random line painted confidently enough. The problem started when the homeowner began issuing handwritten tickets tucked under windshield wipers demanding courtesy fines. Neighbors completely lost their minds. One resident retaliated by painting fake crosswalks leading nowhere. Another added a fake bus stop sign and lawn chair beside the street just to confuse strangers. Soon the entire block resembled a low-budget traffic simulation designed by deeply bored retirees. City officials eventually arrived after confused drivers kept asking where to pay parking violations. Imagine dedicating your retirement years to inventing imaginary infrastructure out of pure suburban vengeance. Fact 28. In a tiny Texas town, a feud erupted because one neighbor installed an industrial-strength mosquito zapper the size of a satellite dish. Every evening, the machine exploded with loud electrical pops that sounded like popcorn being cooked by Zeus himself. At first, people appreciated fewer mosquitoes. Then the zapper started illuminating entire backyards with flashes bright enough to recreate thunderstorms. Residents trying to enjoy peaceful summer nights instead felt trapped inside an apocalyptic bug disco. One exhausted neighbor claimed the flashes caused his chickens to stop sleeping because they believed lightning was permanently happening. The zapper owner refused to unplug it because he described mosquitoes as tiny airborne terrorists. Naturally, retaliation followed. One neighbor installed louder wind spinners. Another released citronella candles across the street like aromatic warfare. By August, the entire neighborhood looked like a low-budget science fiction movie where suburban dads battled insects with military-grade emotional commitment and absolutely no sense of moderation. Fact 29. In a quiet Michigan town, neighbors became sworn enemies because one man started collecting old mannequin parts for art projects. At first, it was just a single mannequin arm sticking out of his garage. Weird, but survivable. Then came the legs, heads, torsos. Soon his porch looked like a department store exploded during a tornado. Children refused to walk past the house after sunset because the mannequins appeared to move positions overnight. One terrified neighbor called police claiming a plastic uprising was occurring across the street. The collector insisted the mannequins were harmless and represented modern loneliness, which somehow made everything worse. Rival residents retaliated by placing sunglasses and fake mustaches on the mannequins during the night like suburban raccoons with too much free time. Soon tourists began stopping for photos beside what locals nicknamed the human graveyard. Nothing captures small-town tension quite like adults emotionally unraveling because of headless plastic people wearing seasonal sweaters. Fact 30. In a small town in Colorado, a feud exploded after one neighbor bought an outdoor karaoke machine and became emotionally convinced he was the next country music legend. Every Friday night, the mountains echoed with painfully confident renditions of classic hits sung several key changes away from reality. The man performed with the commitment of a sold-out stadium concert, despite audiences mostly consisting of exhausted neighbors hiding behind curtains. At first, people politely tolerated it because small towns operate on social guilt and casserole diplomacy. Then he added fog machines. One elderly resident described hearing Sweet Caroline through artificial smoke at 10:30 p.m. as a direct attack on human peace. Retaliation escalated quickly. One neighbor blasted whale noises during performances. Another practiced trumpet solos, specifically timed to interrupt choruses. Soon the street resembled a musical hostage situation sponsored by barbecue smoke and unresolved dreams. Somehow, one man's karaoke hobby transformed peaceful mountain living into America's loudest accidental talent show. Fact 31. In rural Georgia, neighbors launched a years-long feud because somebody built a decorative pond entirely shaped like the state of Texas. Nobody understood why. The owner wasn't from Texas, he'd never even visited. Yet there it sat in the middle of Georgia, like a watery identity crisis surrounded by koi fish. Local residents became bizarrely offended by the pond's confidence. One man argued it was cartographic arrogance. Another claimed the pond psychologically implied Texas was superior to Georgia. Matters escalated after the owner added tiny floating cowboy hats for the fish during summer. Soon rival neighbors retaliated with aggressively patriotic Georgia lawn displays. Peach statues appeared overnight. Somebody painted a bulldog mascot onto their shed roof. One family literally installed a fountain shaped like the state border just to compete. By the end, the neighborhood resembled a deeply unstable geography classroom, funded entirely by middle-aged stubbornness. America truly reaches peak absurdity when adults emotionally weaponize state outlines against each other. Fact 32. In a tiny Vermont town, a feud erupted after one neighbor began feeding crows peanuts every morning. At first it seemed charming. Then the crows started arriving in terrifyingly organized numbers. Within months, nearly 50 birds gathered daily around the house like feathered mobsters demanding tribute. The homeowner proudly named them all and claimed they understood basic conversation. Neighbors strongly disagreed after the crows began stealing shiny objects across town. Earrings disappeared. Wind chimes vanished. One woman swore a crow stole her reading glasses directly off the porch table while maintaining eye contact the entire time. Residents became convinced the birds were operating a criminal network under human supervision. Somebody accused the homeowner of training sky pirates. Retaliation escalated when neighbors installed fake owls everywhere, creating what looked like a bizarre decorative bird arms race. Soon, local children treated the crow house like a haunted attraction. Nothing destroys suburban harmony faster than highly intelligent birds and retirees with too much free time. Fact 33. In a sleepy California town, neighbors nearly tore each other apart because one homeowner built a backyard tiki bar that became wildly more successful than the town's actual bars. Every weekend, people packed into his yard drinking tropical cocktails beside fake palm trees and inflatable parrots, while Jimmy Buffett music floated through the neighborhood like a margarita-scented curse. Nearby businesses became furious after realizing customers preferred Gary's Island Paradise over paying $12 downtown for watered-down beer. The homeowner escalated immediately by printing menus and giving himself the title Captain Gary. Neighbors supporting him arrived wearing Hawaiian shirts like loyal island citizens. Rival residents retaliated by reporting fake zoning violations and anonymously mailing coconuts to his house with threatening notes attached. Soon the entire neighborhood resembled a low-budget Caribbean tourism campaign fueled by suburban rebellion. At some point, a man literally arrived by kayak, strapped to his pickup truck just for atmosphere. Humanity absolutely cannot handle decorative bamboo responsibly. Fact 34. In a tiny Illinois town, a feud exploded after one neighbor installed a gigantic metal rooster weather vane on top of his barn. Unfortunately, the rooster squeaked loudly every time the wind changed direction, which in Illinois meant constantly. Day and night, the entire town heard the horrifying metallic sound of what residents described as a haunted chicken attempting yoga. Sleep-deprived neighbors begged the owner to oil it, but he insisted the squeaking added rustic personality. That sentence alone should qualify as psychological warfare. Soon retaliation began. One neighbor installed louder porch swings. Another added decorative cowbells that rang during storms. Somebody placed a fake fox statue facing the rooster just to create emotional tension between lawn ornaments. The weather vane owner escalated further by adding spotlights that illuminated the giant rooster at night like a cursed agricultural monument. Tourists began stopping for photos after hearing rumors about the screaming farm bird. Somehow, an innocent weather tool became the community's unofficial supervillain. Fact 35. In a quiet town in Wisconsin, neighbors launched a full-scale feud because one man insisted on grilling outside during every snowstorm. Not occasionally, every single snowstorm. While sensible people stayed indoors, this man stood outside flipping burgers beneath falling snow like a suburban Viking challenging nature itself. At first, neighbors admired the dedication. Then the smoke started drifting into nearby homes because winter winds turned the entire street into a giant meat-scented weather system. One exhausted resident complained her curtains permanently smelled like smoked sausage by February. The grill enthusiast refused to stop because he claimed real barbecue season never ends. Naturally, retaliation followed. One neighbor began using an industrial snowblower directly beside the fence every time grilling started. Another blasted tropical beach music during storms, just to mock him psychologically. Soon, people gathered at windows during blizzards, waiting to see if the grill warrior would appear again. Somewhere deep in America, masculinity officially fused with frostbite and propane fumes. Fact 36. In a tiny town in West Virginia, a feud exploded after one neighbor started using a leaf blower to dry his car every single morning. Not wipe it down. Not towel dry it? He marched around the vehicle blasting hurricane-force air at water droplets, like a man preparing a fighter jet for combat. The problem was he did this at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Every day, rain or shine. Neighbors described waking up to the sound as a jet engine, angrily vacuuming the soul out of the neighborhood. The car owner defended himself by claiming towels created swirl marks, which somehow sounded both ridiculous and deeply threatening. Soon, retaliation escalated. One neighbor started revving motorcycles at dawn. Another purchased the loudest pressure washer legally available to mankind. By the end, the street sounded like a NASCAR pit crew trapped inside a hardware store. Nothing captures suburban America more perfectly than adults destroying community peace in pursuit of a shinier sedan. Fact 37. In a small town in Louisiana, neighbors nearly went to war because one homeowner built a backyard volcano for his son's science project and refused to remove it afterward. At first, people tolerated the giant papier-mâché mountain because it occasionally puffed harmless smoke during birthdays. Then the man upgraded it. Suddenly, lava-colored lights glowed from the crater at night, while hidden speakers played rumbling sounds like the Earth itself had digestive issues. Tourists began stopping beside the road asking where the volcano attraction was located. Nearby residents became furious after local children started throwing pebbles into the crater while chanting dramatic survival movie quotes. One neighbor claimed the volcano reduced property values by making the street feel geologically unstable. Retaliation escalated when another resident built an enormous fake dinosaur beside his mailbox to balance the prehistoric atmosphere. Before long, the entire neighborhood looked like a roadside theme park, designed by deeply unsupervised dads with leftover garage supplies. Fact 38. In a rural Montana town, a feud erupted because one man installed giant googly eyes on his barn. Not small, funny ones either. These things were enormous. Drivers passing through town suddenly found themselves being stared at by a massive, surprised barn floating above cornfields like an emotionally overwhelmed cartoon character. At first, locals laughed. Then the owner began changing the eye positions weekly. Sometimes the barn looked confused, sometimes angry. Once it appeared slightly flirtatious, which several residents described as deeply upsetting. Neighbors accused the barn owner of distracting traffic and psychologically manipulating livestock. One woman swore her horse refused to face the barn anymore. Rival residents retaliated by decorating their own structures with facial expressions. Soon, garages had eyebrows. Silos had mustaches. The entire town transformed into a cursed children's television show, powered entirely by agricultural instability. Somewhere in America, farmers accidentally created the nation's first emotionally expressive architecture district. Fact 39. In a tiny Oregon town, neighbors launched a years-long feud because one homeowner refused to stop practicing ventriloquism on his porch every evening. At first, people assumed the strange conversations were phone calls until they realized the man was arguing with a wooden cowboy puppet named Sheriff Buck. The puppet insulted passing drivers, commented on weather conditions, and occasionally sang old country songs at sunset. Neighbors became genuinely disturbed after hearing heated arguments between the man and the puppet lasting well past midnight. One resident claimed she heard the dummy threaten someone over lawn fertilizer. The ventriloquist insisted Sheriff Buck was part of the community, which absolutely did not help matters. Retaliation escalated quickly. One neighbor installed outdoor speakers playing horror movie soundtracks whenever the puppet appeared. Another mailed anonymous notes addressed directly to Sheriff Buck demanding he leave town. Somehow, an entire neighborhood emotionally collapsed because of one man and his aggressively opinionated wooden cowboy. Fact 40. In a quiet town in Arizona, a feud exploded after one neighbor installed an elaborate misting system around his entire property to create desert ambiance. The problem was, the wind constantly blew the mist directly into nearby homes and streets. People walked outside feeling like they'd accidentally entered a tropical greenhouse built beside a gas station. One resident complained her newspaper arrived damp every morning, like it survived a hurricane. Another claimed the moisture made her porch furniture emotionally sticky. The misting system owner refused to adjust anything because he believed the neighborhood needed more luxury resort energy. Soon retaliation began. One neighbor installed industrial fans aimed directly back at his yard. Another filled inflatable kiddie pools beside the sidewalk, purely out of spite. Before long, the entire street resembled a confused water park trapped inside the desert. Tourists driving through literally slowed down, asking if the town had discovered a secret oasis. America remains undefeated at turning mild inconvenience into full theatrical warfare. Fact 41. In a small Tennessee town, neighbors nearly tore the community apart because one man built a giant wooden pirate ship in his front yard for Halloween and simply never took it down. At first, residents admired the craftsmanship. Then Christmas arrived and the pirate ship gained candy cane cannons. By spring, it featured Easter bunnies wearing eye patches. The owner adapted the ship for every holiday with terrifying commitment. Soon, local children referred to the house simply as Captain Dave's. Neighbors became furious because tourists kept stopping to take photos while blocking driveways and accidentally trampling flower beds. One exhausted resident claimed she'd answered the question, "Where's the pirate house?" more times than she'd spoken to her own husband that year. Rival neighbors retaliated by building competing lawn attractions, including a medieval castle trampoline and a giant fake UFO crash site. Before long, the neighborhood resembled a roadside attraction district created by people who absolutely should have discovered quieter hobbies. Fact 42. In a tiny Maine town, a feud erupted after one homeowner installed decorative whale sounds around his property to promote coastal serenity. Every evening, eerie underwater noises drifted through the neighborhood like emotionally exhausted dolphins communicating from another dimension. At first, people found it relaxing. Then the owner added motion sensors. Suddenly, anyone walking past the house triggered loud whale calls directly from hidden speakers in the bushes. Mail carriers nearly launched themselves into orbit from panic. One elderly resident described taking out trash at night and hearing the ocean itself cry behind a hydrangea bush. The whale enthusiast insisted the sounds improved community mindfulness, which is exactly the kind of sentence that creates lifelong enemies. Neighbors retaliated with their own nature-themed warfare. One family installed aggressive jungle noises. Another blasted seagull recordings at sunrise. Soon the street sounded less like peaceful suburbia and more like Noah's Ark, suffering a nervous breakdown during mating season. Fact 43. In a quiet Ohio town, neighbors became sworn enemies because one man built a fully operational miniature train that circled his backyard every weekend. At first, people thought it was adorable. Tiny railroad tracks wound through flower beds while children waved at the little engine like they'd entered a Norman Rockwell painting. Then the owner started blowing an actual train whistle every time the miniature locomotive crossed his driveway. Every 30 minutes, the neighborhood echoed with the sound of a freight train apparently arriving inside suburbia. Sleep vanished instantly. Dogs barked. Babies cried. One exhausted neighbor claimed she spilled soup 3 separate times because of unexpected railroad activity. The train owner refused to stop because he described the whistle as historically authentic. Retaliation escalated beautifully. One neighbor installed crossing gates made from pool noodles. Another dressed as a conductor and silently judged passengers from his lawn chair. Somehow, an innocent hobby transformed an ordinary street into the least necessary transportation crisis in America. Fact 44. In a tiny town in New Jersey, neighbors launched a full-scale feud because one homeowner started projecting old black and white movies onto the side of his garage every night. At first, people loved it. Families brought lawn chairs. Kids watched cartoons under the stars. Then the man became obsessed with artistic authenticity and started screening 3-hour foreign films with subtitles at maximum volume until midnight. Nobody wanted to hear dramatic accordion music while trying to sleep on a Tuesday. One exhausted neighbor described waking up at 2 a.m. to what sounded like an emotional French argument happening inside a washing machine. The movie enthusiast refused to stop because he believed the town lacked cinematic culture. Naturally, retaliation escalated. One resident installed giant floodlights aimed at the garage screen. Another blasted baseball games through outdoor speakers during emotional scenes. Soon, the neighborhood resembled a film festival organized entirely by people fueled by caffeine, resentment, and deeply unnecessary artistic opinions. Fact 45. In a small town in Missouri, a feud erupted after one man installed a life-sized cowboy statue on his porch and began dressing it differently every morning. At first, it wore normal Western outfits. Then things got unsettling. The cowboy appeared in pajamas, raincoats, Easter bunny ears. During football season, it somehow wore shoulder pads and held a foam finger. Neighbors became deeply uncomfortable because the statue changed positions overnight and occasionally appeared staring directly into different windows. One woman claimed she nearly fainted after seeing Cowboy Ron sitting on the porch swing during a thunderstorm wearing sunglasses and a poncho. The owner treated the statue like a family member and reportedly wished it good night. Rival neighbors retaliated by placing their own mannequins around town. Soon, porches contained fake doctors, fake fishermen, even a fake Elvis holding birdseed. The entire neighborhood slowly transformed into the world's least trustworthy wax museum powered entirely by boredom and unresolved psychological issues. Fact 46. In a quiet town in Nevada, neighbors nearly tore each other apart because one homeowner built a decorative waterfall in his backyard that sounded exactly like somebody constantly flushing a toilet. Day and night, the endless rushing water echoed through nearby homes, creating what residents described as a luxury restroom experience from hell. At first, people politely ignored it. Then the homeowner expanded the waterfall into multiple levels complete with fake rocks and hidden speakers playing rainforest noises. One exhausted neighbor claimed he'd stopped trusting his own plumbing because he constantly thought toilets were running somewhere nearby. Matters escalated after local children started throwing coins into the waterfall and calling it the pee fountain. The owner proudly defended the installation as tranquil, which officially became the most offensive word in town. Retaliation followed quickly. One neighbor installed louder windmills. Another built a koi pond with croaking frogs amplified through outdoor microphones. Somehow, peaceful landscaping evolved into acoustic warfare for retirees. Fact 47. In a rural Alabama town, a feud exploded because one neighbor bought an antique ice cream truck and started driving it around the block every evening playing music. The problem was he never actually sold ice cream. He just enjoyed the nostalgic atmosphere. Children sprinted outside carrying dollar bills only to discover a middle-aged man slowly driving away smiling like some frozen dessert phantom. Parents became furious after weeks of emotionally shattered toddlers standing in driveways asking why the ice cream man hated them personally. The truck owner insisted the music spread happiness, and claimed people were focusing too much on the ice cream part. That sentence alone should qualify as villain dialogue. Soon, retaliation escalated beautifully. One neighbor blasted carnival music from his garage. Another drove around in a golf cart tossing broccoli at confused children for realism. By the end, the entire town had developed trust issues triggered by cheerful jingles and soft-serve-related betrayal. Fact 48. In a tiny Florida town, the single most catastrophic feud began because somebody installed a talking animatronic pirate in their yard that reacted whenever people walked past. The pirate shouted things like, "You call that parking?" and "Move along, landlubber," which initially seemed harmless. Then the owner upgraded the system with motion tracking and seasonal dialogue updates. Soon the pirate commented on weather, criticized lawn care, and somehow recognized the mailman by name. Neighbors became genuinely disturbed after hearing the pirate insult recycling habits at 6 in the morning. One resident claimed she avoided walking her dog past the house because the pirate knows too much. Rival neighbors retaliated with their own talking decorations. Skeletons argued across fences. A robotic Santa threatened pirates during Christmas. Somebody installed a fake parrot that screamed legal advice. Before long, the entire street sounded like a cursed Disney attraction abandoned after a hurricane. Civilization truly peaked the moment Americans weaponized animatronics against each other in broad daylight. Humanity survived wars, disasters, and recessions, but nearly collapsed over lawn ornaments, pirates, and aggressively emotional potatoes. Which feud wins absolute gold medal insanity?
Like it fast, don't let it end hard. Hit subscribe, think ends.